All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Yesterlore. And tonight we are going to be looking at the final Germanic rune poem that we are going to look at. Unless people really want to do the early modern Swedish rune poem, then we can try that one. But otherwise, I didn't really plan on doing that one. This will be our last one, unless we do that one. Just let me know if you want to do the other, the early modern Swedish one. We are looking at the Icelandic rune poem today, and it's probably, at least in terms of the copy that we have, and maybe also the composition, looking at some of the ways that things are spelled and so forth, probably the latest recorded Germanic rune poem. So the oldest looking one that we have is the Old English rune poem, and we did that first. Then we looked at the Norwegian rune poem, which was from quite a few centuries later, and then we get the Icelandic rune poem, which is what we're going to be looking at tonight. This rune poem exists in a couple early copies, but we're looking at the earliest dated one. This is dated to about the year 1500, and it is on a sort of two sheets combined kind of situation here. In terms of the manuscript, it's basically two pieces of two sheets binded together here. You can see that. So you basically get 4 pages of this thing. Now, this manuscript, which is called AM 687D Quarto, is a manuscript that is in the Sapn Arna Magnussonar, which is in Iceland. It's in Reykjavik, I believe, at the Arni Magnusson Institute. And what it is part of a collection, presumably by Arni Magnusson, who is this guy. And he was a antiquities collector and manuscript collector in the late 16 and early 1700s. So that's this guy. He collected a bunch of manuscripts and put them all together into a collection named after him, and many of them are in the institute that is now named after him in Reykjavik. So that's where this is. Now, the first page is prayers. I believe prayers to Mary, if I'm not mistaken. Then we get our Icelandic rune poem, which is here, with a bunch of, will look like pictogram symbols, things that look like a little bit like galdrastafir down here, and an alphabet written out. And then there's just some more sort of random texts on the third and last page. So we only really care about this page. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see just how difficult some of this is to make out. But this has been scanned a bunch of times to reveal what some of these sort of smeared / blurry, worn letters are. So we've been able to fill in a good chunk of it. But this is the state of the manuscript. So we are not going to be reading directly from it. For that reason, it's really hard to read. Here are those little pictures at the bottom. I like the little fish that we get here. So we're going to be reading from my typed out version over here on Google Docs, like we've been doing for some of these recently, just because it's frankly easier to read for everyone. So, like we did with the Norwegian rune poem, I'm going to read it out, and then I'm going to explain the words. We might do a little bit of comparison with the other two poems, but I actually had an idea of just doing an entire session, or maybe a couple, where we compare all 3 rune poems that we will have read by the time we're done with the Icelandic rune poem, and look at the stanzas side by side and see what sort of connections we can find, because there are definitely some. So if that would be interesting, let me know. I might do that if no one's interested in that, because they've seen all of the rune poetry stuff. They don't want to go back, they want to do the comparison themselves. That's okay. Just let me know if that sounds like an interesting stream. But what I can say in comparison right now is that the 16 runes that we see here, they are pretty much the same 16 runes that we saw in the Norwegian rune poem. They are both working with younger Futhark, because that is what was primarily being used in Old Norse. Of course, this is a little bit after Old West Norse. It's split up into Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic, but the most recent runic writing would have been the younger Futhark. We don't really have a rune poem that goes with the elder Futhark. So we're going to be working with that same set of 16, which means not all of the Old English rune poem ones are going to have corollary ones, just like with last time. So I'm going to go ahead and read this first stanza. And I did want to point out one other thing about the manuscript is this time we can see I have spelled out the names of the runes. I just realized there should be 2 S's here. Whoops. But in the actual manuscript, in the actual manuscript, or at least this copy that we have, I don't remember if they're in the other one, but in this copy, when it decides to load, you can see that the names of the runes are not written here. It's just rune, and then the word which is. We had that a lot in the Norwegian one as well. So we have the same thing going on, except these have been added in if we're going just off of the AM 687D quarto. These are not there. But we are pretty confident about these just from comparing other copies of this that we have, and also context, and also comparison with the Norwegian rune poem. So, all right. With all that said, I am going to go ahead and read the first stanza. So we've got Fe franda råg och flödar viti och grafseiths gata aurum fylkir. So there's a few interesting things about this compared to the Norwegian rune poem. It does not rhyme like the Norwegian rune poem rhymes. It is something very close to the meter that is called Ljóðaháttr, that a lot of the Eddic poetry is written in. And how that works is basically we get a long line like this, and the line breaks in almost all of these stanzas at the ok here, the and. And this is pretty much like a traditional alliterative line that we'd see in an Old English line of poetry, where we have the 2 half lines with alliteration on either side, either 1 or 2 on the first half, and 1 on the first lift of the second half. That's kind of standard, like fornöðslag, which is sort of the closest Icelandic meter to Old English alliterative verse. That's basically what a line of this is. And then we get a second line, which is a smaller, basically equivalent of a half line. It's not even a full line. And it just alliterates with itself, with 2 max alliterative words here. So here we have ok graf seiths gata. So it's just 2 lifts, and they alliterate with each other. Then we have what I've written here in small caps. I don't actually, the manuscript does not write them in small caps. I did that to differentiate them. What the small caps are that I've written here is these are Latin words, and they seem to be extrametrical. Extrametrical meaning they're not part of the meter of the line. They're not part of they don't fit into the poem in the way that the rest of the line does. It's sort of like it's almost like you can imagine this in parentheses at the end, or like with a dash, like it's a label almost. And what these labels are, and you might notice as we go along, are a Latin word followed by a word that alliterates with the name of the rune. Now that, whether or not alliterates can be loose in the case of here, where we have this, which is representing the W sound, w, and this is a U, oo, but graphically it looks like it alliterates even though it doesn't phonetically or even phonemically alliterate. Like this would not be an appropriate alliteration in an actual line of poetry, but it's just the first letter that appears in the name of the rune that's going to be after the Latin word. And the Latin word is often not a literal translation of the name of the rune, but a Latin word that's sort of associated with or seems to be paralleling the name of the rune. And the word that comes after that has the same first letter as the rune is a word that either means chief or prince or king. They're all just kind of synonyms of ruler that happen to have this first letter of the name of the rune. So that's what we're going to see after all of these. It's Latin word, king or chief or ruler, prince. Some of them are a little bit more specific titles just in order to alliterate or have the same first letter. So that's sort of the pattern with this poem. We get basically a ljóðaháttr stanza with a full line that alliterates, a half line that alliterates only with itself, and a Latin tag plus king. So what does this first one mean? So we have fe, and just like with the Norwegian rune poem, it means the same thing. It means goods, wealth. Literally, it means cattle, but figuratively, it means wealth or goods, capital. And then we have franda rog, which I believe we actually had the same word in the fe. Yeah, it's pretty similar. Fe walder franda rogi. Here we have franda rog, han flödar witty. So, rog, once again, means strife, or like a cause of strife. And so among friends, because this is the genitive plural again, so of friends or among friends, cause of strife. And flödar witty. Witty means a token. It's related to the verb wita, which means to know. So it's like sort of a something that lets you know. It's a witty. And it's a witty of flödar, which is the genitive of sort of the flood, or like the coming of a flood. So cattle or goods, wealth, is a cause of strife among friends, which we had with the Norwegian one, and sort of a harbinger or a token of the coming of a flood. And graf saves gata. So what we have here is gata, which can mean like a path. I think it's related to the word gate, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken there, but I think it's related to the word gate. In fact, I think it's where we get the word gate directly, because the Old English cognate would have a Y at the beginning of it if it had survived. I think it's yacht is the cognate, G-E-A-T. And then we have grafseiths. Grafseiths seems to be a kenning. Seiths or safe here, is a fish, and graf is grave. So it's a grave fish. What is a grave fish? This seems to be a kenning for a snake. So wealth is the cause of strife amongst friends, and the harbinger of the coming of a flood, and a path or a gate for the snake, or the grave fish. So once again, like with the Norwegian rune poem, we kind of get like this sort of negative take on wealth. This word here, wealth brings trouble. Wealth is the cause of strife. It's a warning, which is kind of the vibe we got from the Norwegian rune poem as well. And then we have aurum fylkir, and I'm going to say, actually this probably should be aurum, because I want to, as we read this, use ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation. I have to stop myself from doing the classical Latin pronunciation. I just made that mistake. I said aurum, but it's aurum probably here, because ecclesiastical Latin is probably going to be closer to what these Icelanders, these Christian Icelanders who wrote this manuscript at least, would have been familiar with and probably would have been thinking of, was the ecclesiastical Latin. So I will do my best to use ecclesiastical and not classical Latin pronunciation here. So aurum, and aurum means gold. It could also mean wealth in Latin, by extension from gold to wealth. And then fylkir is a word for chief. It's actually related to folk. It's the one who brings folk together. A lot of words for kings and chieftains are words that are related towards just general words for people. We've seen some of those before in Old English, and this is one of those. So gold chief or gold king. It's not king of gold. The Latin here is just the nominative or accusative case here for gold. It's just gold is the word. King. Some people I've seen interpolate an is here, like a sort of some kind of copula. So like gold is chief, wealth is chief. We could say something like that, but they all would be that, basically. Like the Latin word is king, or the Latin word is chief. I go back and forth on whether I think that's worth doing. I can sort of see these as just tags either way, so it doesn't really matter. Just Latin word chief, Latin word king, whatever you happen to translate these words as. They all are kind of synonyms. All right, let's go to the next stanza. Also, I want to say if there are any questions in the chat as I'm going, do not hesitate to ask. I'm going to move on to the next one. And this is an interesting one because this is the first one where we'll get, and I think maybe the only one, where the name in the Icelandic means something different than the name in Norwegian. Actually, I think the Norwegian had two that were different, but we'll get to it. So, ord skia grátur og skara þverrir og hirðis hatur umbre vísi. And this should probably be a long I. I tried to do my emendations beforehand this time. Sometimes I think it's worth doing live, and I usually do them live, but this time I just kind of wanted to get them done beforehand, but I forgot to put this should be a long I. Vísi. I was going to say vísi, it doesn't sound right. So, ord skia grátur. So, ord, last time, we saw ord referred to what's called dross, which is sort of the waste product of working with metal. When you're doing any kind of blacksmithery, the sort of like what comes off of your work, sort of metal leavings, are called dross. And in Old Norwegian, they're called ord. And we noted that that was very different from what the Old English ord meant. Ord was the word for an aurochs, the sort of ancient wild ancestor of the domesticated cow slash bull. That's what it meant in Old English. And then we got dross in Norwegian. Here we get ur, meaning rainwater. It means rainwater here. And we get that through just plain context, even if we didn't have glosses where this does mean rainwater sometimes. I do believe it could be etymologically related to the meaning of dross, because in both cases you have like little bits of things falling off of something, either off of metal or off of the sky, I guess. And we're about to get the word skya, which is the genitive plural of ski, which is where we get the word sky in English. In modern English, we have the word sky from Old Norse, and it's the gråter skya. It is the weeping gråter of the sky, or of the clouds, skya. Because usually skya actually means clouds. Interestingly enough, the word for sky in Old English also could mean clouds. Wolken is the word in Old English, which mostly has gone out of use in modern English. But the sky meaning was replaced by ski. There's also the word rodor in Old English that means sky. Especially, it's more of a poetic word for it. So you'll see it in poetry, but not as much in prose. Sometimes you'll see it in prose. But in this case, so it's the weeping of the clouds, or of the skies. Probably weeping of the clouds, because it's rainwater. And skara thverr. So skara is a genitive again. It's reaping. This is related to the word shear. When you shear something, you like cut it. But in the Old Norse here, the Old Norwegian, we're in Icelandic here. The Old Icelandic, it means reaping, cutting crops. And what is it of reaping? It is the thverr. Now, thverr is an adjective. It means sort of crossways or adversarial, off-kilter. It can mean off-kilter, or just like opposite of what some kind of opponent force here. This id here is making it like a noun instead of an adjective here. So it's like one who is adversary, an adversarial force. This word exists, a cognate exists in Old English, thwer, and it means a similar thing, like off-kilter, converse. And the Middle Low German, I think we have examples where it's spelled twer or dwer or quer with a Q. And that word gets loaned into Scots, I believe, and that is where we get the word queer in modern English. But the word thwer in Old English, there are some other words related to it, and from that sort of complex of related words, we also get the word thwart. When you thwart someone or someone thwarts you, they're your adversary. They've been adversarial to your aim. So all of those words are related to this one, thwerrir here. The adversary of reaping. So rain, it's the weeping of the clouds, and it is what keeps you from being able to harvest. Because if it's raining, you're not going to go out and harvest, or it's going to be annoying, at least, to do so. And also, if you have too much rain, your crops aren't going to grow, and then that's going to be adversarial to your harvest as well. Ok hirðis hattur, and hattur here is an enemy, and it's the enemy of hirðir, which is a herder, a shepherd. So it's the enemy of the shepherd. So we get rain, basically rain sucks, is this stanza. And then our Latin is umbre visi. Visi is, again, another word for king, chief. Umbre is actually kind of interesting here. It can either be the plural or the genitive. It's spelled strangely either way. There should be an A here, like umbre there. It would be umbrae in Latin. But it means, the singular means shadow. So this is like shadows, or like of a shadow. So this one actually could parse if you combine it with the Icelandic word as like chief of shadow or something like that. Because this is not in the nominative like most of the other words are. It's either a nominative plural, so it could be shadows king. I don't think it would be the only plural we get, actually. So it could be shadows king. It's just plural because. Or it could be of shadows king. So this is another example where it's like close, shadows, rain. It's not a translation, but it does sort of have something to do with the topic of rainwater. We talked about clouds. So shadow kind of makes sense. All right, let's go to the next one. So we've got thurs here. Thurs quenna qual, cletta bui, warðrunar ver, Saturnus thengil. So, our first one is thurs, and this one's the same as Norwegian. It meant like giant or etin in the like being sense, not in the size sense. Not like big giant necessarily, but just the kind of being, a thurs or an etin, a jotun. And we have a similar theme here as we did in the Norwegian rune poem. Thurs quenna qual. I believe it was actually almost similar. I think it was the same words we even had. Yeah, quenna quillu here. Here we have quenna qual. Same words, just different cases and stuff. In the case of quenna, it's the same. So it's the torment of women. And kletta bui. Bui is a dweller, one who stays in a certain place. Kletta, and this is the genitive plural, of crags, of craggy places. Ok warðrunar ver. Now, ver means husband, actually. It's cognate with wed in Old English, and wed in Old English usually means man in the gendered sense, like a male. It's the were that we have in werewolf. Means man. But in Old Norse, it usually means husband. So it's the husband of warðrun. So a warðrun is a giantess, and I think we had a reference to a giantess before, didn't we? Cannot remember if we did. I don't think we actually did in this stanza, at least. We had it somewhere else. I cannot remember where. When we do our 3 rune poem comparison, we can go over that. But it is the husband of the giantess. So we have the giant and we have the giantess. And then we have Saturnus, which I don't think you need me to translate necessarily. Saturnus is Saturn. So it could be it's probably the Roman god Saturn here. And this is one where we're kind of like, why Saturn and Thurs? This could be sort of an example of equating sort of these kind of negative beings of like the pagan heathen past with the pagan Roman past. Just like, this is a sort of negative or malicious entity, and Roman gods, same thing if you're Christian. And we are fairly positive that people writing this down were Christian. So, it's all kind of the same thing, a deity and a giant. And if you're doing like a Greek Roman interpretation where Saturn is equivalent to Kronos, then that's extra reinforced because Kronos was a Titan. which are sort of more chaotic entities, much like the Ettins are in Norse belief. So I think it's just a generic equation of Roman deity with some maybe chaotic elements and chaotic giant beings. And we get this word thengil, which is another word for prince. Usually it's used for prince. All right, let's go to the next one. And here we've got Os algengautur og Asgards jovur og Valhallar vísi. This is another one that should have an I accented. I can't believe I missed this on Weesey both times. Jupiter Aldwitty. All right. So os here, this is cognate to, if we go with the one of the interpretations of Old English, it is cognate to os. If we go with os means heathen god, probably Odin in Old English. Probably that god because it's associated with, in names, it probably refers to that god, and also it's talking about wisdom and speech in the Old English poem, so that's probably who they're talking about. In the Norwegian rune poem, we had Os flastra ferða for. This time, though, we have Os. This one is pretty different from the other one. This one is pretty clearly talking about Odin more than any of the other ones. So, sorry, I'm getting a notification. Forgot to turn this off before the stream, sorry. So, this is definitely referring to Odin in Old Norse, and I will tell you why. Because Os, the god, this is the singular of the plural, which is acid, which are the gods in Norse belief, is Algin Gautur, is Old Gautur. Now, Gautur is a name that appears for Odin, because as we saw last time, and the time before when we were reading Runetal, Odin has a ton of names, and Gautur is one of them. There's also a Goths deity referenced in a Latin text that's talking about the Goths. It's spelled G-A-U-T-S, Goths, in Gothic, who appears to be the same figure, but we're not sure. There's a lot of debate about it. A lot of people feel very strongly that Goths is not the same as Odin, and they were kind of combined, or they just were always separate elsewhere. And there is an Old English cognate, Yat, G-E-A-T, but this time it's a long diphthong, which is the ethnonym for the Yats, the people who lived in what is now Sweden, southern Sweden, of whom Beowulf is royalty. So that seems to be cognate as well. But we know that Gautur is a name for Odin. And we get Ok and Osgards Jovur. Jovur is another word for king. And Osgards, this is Osgard, what we usually anglicize, is Asgard. Osgards is the literally enclosure of, it's like God enclosure. It's the same word os, just spelled a little differently. Because in different cases, this all does different things. So it's God enclosure. It's where the gods live, and he is the king, or the chief of Osgard. Ok and Valhallar vísi, and king of Valhall. Valhall is the slain hall, the hall of the slain. Not a lot of question about this being Odin here. Then we get Jupiter, another Roman god, but it's Jupiter. Jupiter, Aldwitty. Witty here meaning king. Ald here referring to weapon, so it's like weapon king, which again makes sense because Odin is also associated with war. But Jupiter is kind of interesting because in other places, there's Roman interpretation that sort of parallels Jupiter with Thor, because of the whole like thunder and lightning thing. They're both associated with that, and that's why we get Thursday for Dies Iois, Day of Jupiter, becomes Day of Thor, or Day of Thunar in Old English. Thunar is die, but in another way, you could sort of compare Jupiter with Odin, because they both seem to be... Yeah, I know, it's interesting. Jupiter equals... Oh, yeah, North Sea poet. Jupiter equals Odin? Yeah, like, if you ignore the actual sort of things associated with them in particular, and just look at who is sort of in charge of the pantheon in the eyes of Christians retrospectively, looking back at both different kinds of paganism, they're like, okay, Jupiter's in charge of the Roman gods, and Odin seems to be in charge of the Norse gods, at least as far as poets are concerned. So we're just going to parallel them, just like we paralleled giants with Saturn. Yeah, it's pretty interesting that they did that. So that is us, very unambiguously related to Odin, unlike the Old English where it's kind of ambiguous. Now we're going to go into the next one, which is Reid, which is the same as in Old Norwegian and in Old English. Reid. Norsipa says, good to see that early Christian scholars kept the Romano interpretatio alive. Yeah, they didn't let it go. It's all heathen or pagan stuff to them. It's all, yeah, doesn't make much. I mean, it makes a difference in the sense that there's cultural relevance for them, for both in different contexts. But it's all wrong, because Christianity is correct in the opinion of these scholars here writing. So we've got Reid sitjandi sala an snúði ferð an Jórs erfiði, iter rasir. So Reid is, Reid once again is writing, the concept of writing, just like rod is in Old English. Writing, sitjandi sala. So sala here, this is that word that meant sort of joy. Joy for sitjandi. Sitjandi, sitjandi is a one who sits. It's someone who's riding probably on a horse. So riding is the joy, or is a joy for riders. Riders enjoy riding. That's why they're riding. And snúði ferð. Snúðig meaning swift, snúðig. And then ferð being journey. So a swift faring, a swift journey. And erfiði Jórs. Erfiði meaning labor or work or toil. It's the toil of Jór, which is an old poetic word for horse. So we've got our horse quota check for this stanza. Did we have that in the Norwegian one? We did have horse, but we had the cognate of the English word horse here, hross. We just noticed that in Norwegian the H is tended to lop off the beginning of words. And we had a horse, I'm 90% sure, in rad in Old English as well. There we go. Rad. Yes, it's mara. Yeah, there we saw the word mer, which is cognate of the word mare in modern English, which in modern English specifically refers to a female horse, but in Old English it's any horse. There's just a lot of poetic words for horse, because horses were a lot more important to the average person back then. So it's fun for the rider, it's a swift journey, and it's hard work for the horse. That is true. And then we have iter, and iter means journey. Again, pretty close to the word riding, journey, riding. in Latin, iter, and reiser, another word for chief. All right, let's go to the next one. And the next one is another one it's actually, I'm just going to point out when it's different than the Norwegian rune poem, because pretty much all of these are the same in terms of the meaning of the word. So, kaun, like we had before, is a sore or an ulcer, some kind of bodily sore. And similar theme here, we have kaun barna bol og bardaga for og holdfua hus, flagella konungur. So, I'm going to explain this bracket here. This is not in the manuscript, but we have an adjective here that's not describing anything, and we need, it can refer to a wound as well. Thank you, North Sea Poet. We have an adjective, bardaga, here. We don't have a word here, and it's also metrically a problem. Like, there's a missing, lift in the line that isn't here. And so most people have interpolated this word for here because it makes contextual sense. It doesn't alliterate, which is good. You don't want it to alliterate. It's a short word, so you don't have to interpolate a lot. You can just say maybe they forgot the word when they were copying it from whatever older copy they might have had, or they missed the word when someone was reciting it out loud or something. It could be a different word, though. I just did want to point it out. We don't know what the word here would be, but there is a noun missing. And most people just kind of assume it's this one. So, kaun barna bol. Whatever this is, sore, wound, ulcer, whatever it happens to be. Grievous, painful thing on body. Barna bol. It is the death of children. And it is bardaga. This means sort of, it's a kind of has an adjectival meaning of a noun, bardagi, which means an assault or a beating, hitting, or even like a calamity, something horrible. And then we have this word for interpolated, and for is a word for literally it means journey. It's another word for journey, but it also is used for just any kind of I guess this one also can mean assault as well. In a modern context, I'd also say it's a skin tear or a pressure sore, but I'm just being awkward. I don't think that's awkward. I think it makes sense. The word kaun is vague, and the description here is vague. So what specifically it is, we can't know what they were referring to, and they might have meant it to be applicable to any kind of skin-related pain. It's just the name of the rune that they probably inherited. So, when writing a poem about it, it's a vague noun, so we're going to make the rest of the stanza vague. We'll see the Latin is a little weird, too, with regards to this. It gives us another possible interpretation. I think a skin tear can actually make a lot of sense for what the Latin says, but we'll get there in a second. So it's a beating assault. It's a horrible attack. And holdfua hus. It is the house, hus, of holdfu. Fua here, of decay. And hold is the body. So it's the house of bodily decay. Whatever this is. It's maybe the source or the home. The reason for bodily decay. I don't think I've seen hus used that way. But it's the place of bodily decay, maybe. Hus being used poetically there. I see North Sea Poet says, yeah, that's a fair point. It's interesting. It's an interesting name to use for a rune, though, given how much people make out all the runes have positive names. I think it's supposed to be right now, maybe. Decay, that sounds like pressure sore, but like a really bad that's turned necrotic. Yeah, it could be. I think this is part of the reason why people think it's try make out. Yeah, people try to make out all the runes to have positive names. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Especially if you compare the Old English. The Old English does seem to be positive because the Old English doesn't mean anything negative. The Old English one, Cain, means like a torch. and it seems to be a pretty positive stanza too. It's talking about the light that burns from the torch, and it talks about the light in the context of being safe indoors. So that does have a very positive look. And I've seen many people point this out in different rune sources, and it's an interesting idea. The idea happens to be that this word kaun, the cognate of it in Old English, I wish there was one that focuses on the Northumbrian Futhark, though. Yeah, it's almost like we need a Northumbrian rune poem, North Sea Poet. Wonder who can provide one with us for us. So this would be the Old English cognate, can, if it had survived into Old English, can. It doesn't. There is no Old English word can. And so some people think that this is actually what the Old English rune name meant, that it's just a weird dialectal monophthongization of can to can that happens in some Old English dialects, and that this no longer had meaning in Old English. If the word only survived as a rune name from Proto-Germanic kauna, then can would not mean anything anymore. And so they had to assign a new meaning, and the closest word is can, which means torch. So some people think that it did originally mean the same thing that it meant in Old Norse, but it was reassigned meaning because there was no surviving cognate other than just frozen in the name of the rune. And so they just picked another word that sounded the same, and now that's what the rune means in Old English. That is a theory I've seen, and it seems plausible to me. I'm just not sure what I think about it. I don't necessarily know that I would assume that all of the rune names were the same amongst all the Germanic Proto-Germanic speaking tribes. So it is possible that both existed in Proto-Germanic and just some went one way, some went the other. Or maybe all of them did call it kauna at one point, and just the cognate of kauna in Old English didn't mean anything anymore and they reassigned it. Either way, I think both are possible. There's no way to know for sure. So it's up to you to decide. Yeah, we do. I think that is we do need a Northumbrian rune poem. I'm writing poems, not a single one, because apparently... Okay. Yeah, just for those who don't have context, North Sea Poet is working on some Northumbrian rune poem stuff. Definitely recommend you check that out once that's done or released. To be fair, sores and boils and wounds do feel warm to the touch and cause inflammation, so it's an interesting connection to make. Possibly, yeah. Definitely the words wouldn't be etymologically related to each other. Can comes from a completely different word in Proto-Germanic. But it's not too much of a leap to go from pain to fire. It's not too far of a leap, for sure. Oh yeah, let's talk about the Latin here. Flagella. This is another one that's plural. The singular is flagellum, and this is the Latin source of the word flagellate. And so you might be able to guess, flagellum means a whip, and this is the plural, so it's whips. Whips, or that which whips inflict, is what this can mean in Latin. So lashings or scourges is the meaning of this, if you want to translate it literally. Either whips or whippings. So it's interesting that this is the word in Latin that they're associating or labeling kaun with. I'm not going to read what you said, North Sea Poet. Yeah, so it's, and this is the word konungur, which is actually the cognate of the word king. We finally have a word king that is the same as an English word for king. There is actually a word thengel in Old English that's cognate to this, though. Or thengel, sorry, I forgot to palatalize that G. Stengel, I'm pretty sure, in Old English. And it goes away, it doesn't survive into modern English. But konungur here for king. And because kaun starts with K, we can actually use the word konungur. Okay, next one, hagal. Hagal kaldakorn och krapadriva. This should be a long I too. Wow, I did not do the best job of normalizing this. No, it's okay. I could read it. This is not being marked as like a child stream, so don't worry about that. I'm just letting you keep it to yourself for now. Krapadriva och snaka såt grando hildinger. So, hagel kalda korn. Hold up. That sounds familiar. Let's go to the Norwegian rune poem. We had hagel kaldaster korna. And back then when we read that, we said, hey, hold on. Heil bith huitust korna. So they all just really like comparing heil, or hagel here in Old Norse, hail, with grain, corn in the old world sense of grain, not maize, because the ancient Germanic peoples didn't have any maize. But all of them are comparing hail to corn. All three rune poems do that, which is interesting to me. And both of the Old Norse ones, the Old Norwegian and the Old Icelandic, call it the Norwegian calls it the coldest corn. Here we have cold corn. It is cold grain. What's maize? I don't know if you're joking, because you spelled it correctly. So I think you might be joking, but in case you're not, like the yellow sort of seed of grass. I know it's not a seed, but the sort of what comes out of the yellow grass that has the little kernels. That's corn. We call that corn now. Maize is the sort of plant, but the word corn already existed in Germanic languages because corn just meant grain, and it's really just the word kernel as well. Kernel is from corn. So it is cold corn, it's cold grain, and krapa driva. It is the driving or the drift driva of krapa. This is sleet. So sleet drift. You're gonna slip. I just assumed it's spelled that way because US tends to replace S with Z in certain words, like organization. So organization is... Yeah. It was a correct assumption. Maize, we spelled it M-A-I-Z-E. Yeah. So it's cold grain and sleet drift and snaka sot. The snake's sot is sickness. The snake's sickness. That doesn't make the most sense to me. Honestly, I have to say I'm not quite sure what snake's sickness means in this context, but we get cold corn, we get sleet drift, and we get snake sickness. And then we have grando hildinger, and this is grando means a hailstorm. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's just kind of, it seems like a random thing. But yeah, grando hildinger. Hildinger actually means hero more literally than it does king, but in poetry, heroes, king, chief, all close enough. But grando is the word for hailstorm. Basically, hail is associated with the cold and winter, which can cause illness in humans and animals. At least that's my take anyway. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I made this comparison last time because the Norwegian rune poem said a very similar thing. The Old English had a more positive look on this one, where it was like hail is the whitest grain. And it's like, yeah, what did it say exactly? I'm forgetting specifically the word, yeah. Yeah, it comes from like the heaven's air. It walks in the wind's showers. Yeah. It then turns to water. It's kind of neutral. Yeah, it's just white grain, comes from the sky, melts eventually. Yeah. On about it melting and nourishing. Yeah, it doesn't really go about nourishing the earth, but it definitely goes about melting. Yeah, melting and I don't know, looking nice. The ice one is also really a lot more positive in Old English too, but we'll get there. We have another one to do before that. We have náð. So we've got náð þýjar þrá og þungur kostur og vatnssamling verk opera nýflungur. So náð, again, is need. This was cognate in Old English. Need or necessity or constraint. Had a bit of a wider semantic field back then. Any kind of constraint or pressure. And náð þýjar þrá. It is the thra, yeah, or hardship, yeah. Just a lot of negative connotations with náð. Although, once again, the Old English one had a more sort of positive take on it. I associate it with hardship anyway. Yeah, I do too. Sometimes when I'm using Old English runes, but or just any runes, even though the Old English rune poem is a little bit more neutral on it, it does say need is narrow on the breast, though it becomes a help to those who heed it. So it's like the Old English again kind of puts a positive spin on it, or like sort of a more of a neutral spin on it. Like need, need or náð here is hardship, but if you pay attention to it, it can be, it's good to pay attention to it, basically. Use it as an opportunity of some sort. So thrall here means sorrow. And þýjar here is related to, so this is the word like a slave, female slave here. So constraint or hardship is the sorrow of the slave woman. Og þungur kostur. And a þungur kostur. Þungur is like a situation or a condition. Kostur, it is an oppressive situation. Og vatnssamling verk. Vatnssamling verk. Verk is work. We saw that word last week in the Runetal. And vatnssamling is I think it would translate to like woesomely if we kept cognates in English, but laborious work, which kind of foreshadows the Latin. Opera is another plural. Works. Opus is the singular here in Latin. It means work, like a labor. But the Latin, especially in the ecclesiastical Latin that the Icelanders would have been more familiar with than the classical Latin. In classical Latin, it usually means work in the sense of like a great work of an artist or something. We have that sense in English. We've borrowed the Latin word opus to basically mean that. An opus is like your masterpiece kind of thing. That's sort of the classical Latin connotation with this word for work. In the plural, similar kind of thing. In ecclesiastical Latin, it's specifically associated with works for God, or like good works in the sort of classical Catholic sense. So it's interesting that it's getting sort of, it kind of has a much more positive connotation than náð seems to. Yeah, I associate it with hardship. Yeah, work is a hardship though, regardless of industry. Yeah, so it's almost like the Icelandic is echoing the Norwegian, where it's like constraint is work, it's difficulty. But then the Latin is over here like it's like good works. Work is or works here, toils are nýflungur are, and this is one where I don't think there is an example that I have seen or I'm aware of where it literally means king. Nýflungur is a if you're familiar with like Eddic poetry, you would probably know what nýflungur is. It's the nýflungs, the nýflungar, which are the people in the why am I forgetting? It's like the story of Sigurdur. What's the word? Volsunga saga. There we go. The Volsung cycle of the Nibelungs are a people, and in German it's the Nibelunge. And so those again are a people in the Nibelungenlied, for example. So this is one of those people, or the person for whom they are named, because it seems to be a singular name. And I think there is somewhere on the family tree where there is a Niflungur amongst the Niflungar, I think. Just like there's a Volsungur among the Volsungs. Okay, I think we could do one more. I want to do Is and then call it a night, because it is 8 p.m. Pacific here. So, Is borkur och underþak och fegra manna far, glacies jovur. Is, yeah, and Is in all three is ice. It just has 2 S's in Old Norse. It's a long I in both Old English and Old Norse. It has 1 S in Old English. And it means ice. This is one where the Old English was talking about how it looks pretty, like it looks like crystal. Here we have is borkur. Now, or here is the genitive of the word all, which means river. It's actually cognate to aqua in Latin. Lots of sound change between the Indo-European and this in the Indo-European in Latin, but it's just all in Old Norse. It's in Old English, and it also means river there usually, river or flowing water. In Old Norse, it's pretty much always river or creek. So borkur, this is bark. It's river bark, because ice is like solid on a river. It's like as if the river has bark. Och underþak, it's the cover of the waves, or of the wave. Singular under is wave. So it's the thak, the thatch, the covering of the wave. It's same thing again, like it covers the water. Och fegra manna far. Far here is it's harm. It's harm of men, but what kind of men? Fegra. Fegra means like doomed. Fegr here. The English cognate that still exists in modern English, but it's like archaic and you only see it in really old stuff, is the word fey, F-E-Y. Not to be confused with F-A-Y or F-A-E or however you see it spelled now. This is not, it has nothing to do with fairies or anything like that. Fey here means sort of like doomed to die. Yeah, ice can be harmful. You get sharp enough icicle and you can do some real damage with that. Yeah, ice is dangerous. And also just if you're living in Iceland, winter sucks. You know, hail sucks for crops, and ice sucks for living in winter. And then glacies in Latin here, this is the Latin word for ice. I think this is the most direct translation we've got so far. I think hailstorm and hail are pretty close, and yeah, no, none of them are closer, I think, than this is just literally the word for ice. Also, let's not forget what ice did to the Titan. Yeah, this is basically foreshadowing for what happened like 400 years later. Jovur, again, means king. We had that before in the Os one. Okay, we're going to stop there because it's 4 after now. But I wanted to just do a final check. If anyone in the chat has an opinion on, should I do, once we're done with the Icelandic rune poem, a, like, comparing all 3 rune poems session, where I sort of put all the stanzas side by side and we look at the similarities and differences. Would that be interesting to people? Because if not, I can say skip that and just go to whatever I have planned after. And I am still looking for ideas for people if they want to share those. I do have some lined up for after the rune poems, but I want to have sort of like a list of things that we're going to do moving into the future. Next time I actually plan on showing you some of like my planned stuff for the future. But would that be interesting to anyone in chat? Just let me know. I'm going to take a drink of my water. I expect next time we're going to finish the Icelandic rune poem. So this would be, if we do a comparison one, that would be in 2 weeks. So we'll finish the Icelandic rune poem next week, then do the 3-poem comparison, compare and contrast thing. I'm hearing yes, do it. Okay, yeah. I'll probably do like a spreadsheet kind of thing, so they're all lined up. And we'll only be looking at 16 of them because, well, actually maybe a little bit more than 16 for reasons. I think I've explained it before, but we'll do that again. It will be helpful to my students. Yeah, I think it might be good because I don't think I've seen a good place where all of the rune poems are compared. There are definitely books out there that talk about all three, and I've definitely seen some people talk about some similarities and differences, but I don't think I've ever seen a resource where they're like all three of them, like stanza by stanza, lined up. I might just not have encountered it yet, but I think it could be fun to do. And it will be with, I'm going to say 17 of the stanzas because there are only 16 to compare with in the Norse ones. But I say 17 and not 16 because there's a situation where the name of one rune has the like identity of another rune and the actual shape of yet another rune. So we might be like doing 17 or 18 just to maybe see if there's connections in the non-exact equivalent poems. That might be, I think I'd want to include all three of those in that situation. But other than that, we'd be looking at not all, whatever it was, 28 Old English ones. I think it was 28 or something like that, stanzas. I've literally gone on stream and counted, but that was a few weeks ago. So yeah, I'm going to stop there. I hope everyone else has a wonderful rest of your evening / night. 29 for Old English. Yeah, I was off by one. Yeah, have a rest of your time zone. The Northumbrian ones is 33. Yeah, so do they include the some of the runes that exist in Futhark but don't have rune poems? Like things like the ST one doesn't have a poem, if I remember correctly. And some of those other G's and like Kalk and stuff. That'll be cool. I've actually never seen any of the Northern runes. Yeah, I'm going to be writing poems for them too. Yeah, I'm excited for that. All right. I've said it 3 times now, but I'm going to actually mean it this time. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and everyone in the future watching this. Next week, more Icelandic rune poetry. Week after that, comparison of rune poetry, and then we'll be moving on to other things, and I'll be previewing what those other things will be next week. Thank you, and have a good rest of your time zone. Farewell.